Young Seokjin adjusted his cufflinks in the hotel lobby mirror, 40 minutes from the altar, 40 minutes from becoming Han Ki-won's husband and cementing the largest syndicate merger Seoul had ever seen. He didn't notice the boys at first. 3 small shapes weaving past the orchids near the front desk, blazers pressed, ties knotted with more precision than most grown men managed. Then one of them stopped. The boy tilted his head, raised a hand, and pressed one finger thoughtfully against his chin, the exact gesture Seokjin made in silence right before he decided whether a man lived or died. Seokjin's own hand was halfway to his tie. It froze there. He turned. 3 faces turned back toward him, unbothered, unaware, wearing his jawline, his eyes, his stillness. One boy laughed. One smiled like he already knew a secret. The third only watched him, chin resting on his knuckles, studying Seokjin the way Seokjin studied his enemies. 6 years of silence collapsed into a single second. Naomi was back. Seokjin stood frozen at the threshold, one door leading to his wedding, his empire, his crown, the other leading to a truth he could no longer outrun. The truth he could no longer outrun had a face, 3 faces, and they were already gone by the time he turned back to the lobby doors. Seokjin walked into the ballroom like a man moving through water. 400 guests, syndicate captains from 3 families, Ki-won at the altar in ivory silk, radiant, certain, already rehearsing the smile she'd give the cameras. He stopped 6 feet from her and did not kneel, did not take her hands. "I can't do this." The words landed like a dropped glass. Somewhere behind him, a violin faltered and stopped. Ki-won's smile held for one more second, the trained kind, the kind you learn when your family taught you that composure is armor. "Say that again." "There are 3 boys in the city who share my face. I have to find out why." He said it plainly, the way he gave orders, because he didn't know how to say it any other way. The ballroom did what ballrooms full of powerful people do when one of their own is humiliated in public. It went utterly, dangerously silent. Somewhere in that silence was the unanswered question nobody in the room dared ask out loud. If Seokjin had never known about the boys, who had made sure he never found out? Ki-won's father rose halfway from his seat. A captain's hand went to his jacket out of pure instinct. And Ki-won didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply looked at Seokjin with the flat, calculating stillness of a woman recalculating every plan she'd built her life on. "You will regret this," she said, quiet enough that only he heard it. "Whoever she is, whoever those boys are, I will find them before you do." Seokjin didn't answer. He was already moving, jacket abandoned on a chair, tie loosened with one hand as he pushed through the doors into a Seoul evening that had turned to rain without permission from anyone. He saw her half a block down, Naomi, hood up, 3 small figures pulled close against her sides, moving fast toward a city bus idling at the curb. He called her name once. She didn't stop. He ran, dress shoes useless on wet pavement, rain soaking through a shirt that cost more than most people's rent, and reached the curb just as the doors hissed shut. Through the fogged glass, Naomi looked at him. Not with fear, not with old love either. She looked at him the way you look at a fire that has already taken everything from you once, the way you look at something you have learned, at great cost, never to trust again. The bus pulled away. Seokjin stood in the rain and understood, with a cold certainty that reached all the way to his chest, that to Naomi Sterling, he was no longer the man she had once loved. He was the danger she had spent 6 years running from. It took him 3 days to find her, and every one of those days cost him something he couldn't get back. Seokjin had men who could locate anyone in Seoul within hours, informants in every district, cameras he owned outright, favors owed by half the police force. But he didn't use them, not at first. He walked the city himself, in plain clothes, through neighborhoods his empire had never bothered to touch because there was no money left in them to take. By the time one of his men finally traced a school uniform order to a tailor in Itaewon, Seokjin already understood something that shamed him quietly. He had built an empire that stretched across 3 countries, and it had never once reached the alley where his sons slept. The building was the kind that didn't have an elevator, the kind where the stairwell smelled like old rain and someone else's dinner. He climbed 4 flights and stood outside a door with peeling paint, and for a long moment he didn't knock, because he was trying to understand how a woman he had once wanted to give the whole city to had ended up here instead. When Naomi opened the door, she didn't look surprised. She looked tired in a way that went past sleep, and she filled the doorframe with her whole body like she'd done it before, for other men, for other reasons. "You shouldn't be here." "They're mine." It wasn't a question. He needed her to say it wasn't true. She didn't. She also didn't step aside. Behind her, he could hear small voices, the clatter of a game, ordinary and warm, completely unaware that the man standing in the hallway had just felt the floor of his life shift beneath him. 6 years, Naomi. His voice cracked in a place he didn't know could still crack. 6 years I could have. Could have what? Her eyes were dry, but there was a war behind them. Given them a father who runs a criminal empire, given them a target on their backs before they could walk. I protected them from you, Seokjin, from all of it. He wanted to argue. He wanted to remind her of the man he used to be before the Jung name swallowed him whole. The question neither of them said out loud, but both of them felt. Whether that man was still in there somewhere, or whether he'd been gone so long there was nothing left to save. "Go home," she said, and began to close the door. That was when his eyes caught the kitchen counter behind her, a small stack of papers, official stamps, red ink, eviction notices. 3 of them, dated for the end of the month. Seokjin didn't say a word about the eviction notices. He didn't need to. He simply memorized the address on the top one, filed it away with the same cold precision he used to remember which captain owed him a debt, and left before Naomi could see what was already forming behind his eyes. 2 days later, he found himself standing outside a different building, the wrought iron gates of the academy where his sons spent their mornings, a school built for the children of ambassadors and conglomerate heirs. He wasn't supposed to be there. He didn't care. He arrived just as the afternoon bell let out, and just in time to hear it. A cluster of mothers stood near the pickup circle, expensive coats and expensive opinions, watching Naomi walk her sons toward the gate. One of the women, loud enough to be heard on purpose, remarked that she didn't understand how certain people kept getting scholarships meant for real families. Another laughed. Patris's smile faltered. Jeffrey's chin dropped. Evans, ever the fighter, opened his mouth to answer back, and that was the moment Seokjin crossed the street. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. A man who commanded rooms full of armed men simply by entering them didn't need volume to silence a group of mothers in cashmere. "These are my sons," he said, loud enough for the whole circle to hear, and something in his own chest cracked open saying it out loud in daylight in public for the first time in his life. "And if anyone here has a problem with that, you can bring it to me directly." The unanswered question rippled through the crowd of parents faster than gossip could carry it. What was the head of the Jung family doing kneeling on school pavement for children no one had known existed until this moment? Because that's exactly what he did next. He knelt down, right there on the asphalt in his tailored suit, and one by one straightened the boys' crooked ties with hands that had signed death warrants and now trembled doing something far more frightening, being a father in front of witnesses. "You are Jung's," he told them quietly. "You will never bow your head to anyone in this city again." He stood, expecting relief on Naomi's face. Gratitude, maybe. Instead, when he turned to her, her eyes were burning with something far more dangerous. She grabbed his arm and pulled him aside, her voice a low, furious whisper only he could hear. "Do you understand what you just did? You didn't protect them. You just told every enemy you have exactly where to find my children." Naomi was right, and by the following morning she had proof of it. Word moved fast in Seokjin's world. By the time the sun came up, 2 rival syndicate captains already knew a young heir might be living unprotected in Itaewon, and men like that didn't wait for confirmation before they started circling. Naomi had built her entire 6 years on staying invisible. In one afternoon on a school pavement, Seokjin had erased it. So when he came to her that evening asking for a paternity test, not for himself, he insisted, but to satisfy the captains who now demanded proof before deciding whether her sons were an asset worth protecting or a liability worth removing. Naomi agreed almost too quickly. "Fine," she said. "Do it here tonight." He didn't notice how calm she was. He was too relieved she wasn't fighting him. The technician came, a quiet, efficient man Seokjin trusted, and took the swabs in Naomi's small bathroom while Seokjin waited in the hallway, believing the truth was finally, simply, about to be confirmed. He didn't see Naomi slip into the bathroom behind the technician for 30 seconds, didn't see her palm 3 swabs from an old federal case file she kept hidden behind the bathtub panel, didn't see her hands, steady as they'd ever been in 6 years of living exactly this kind of double life. 2 days later, the results reached the syndicate captains. Negative match. Seokjin read the report standing in his own office, and something in his chest folded in on itself. Not relief. Grief, sharp and unfamiliar, for 3 boys who had felt like his sons the moment he knelt in front of them, and who the paper in his hand now insisted were not. He didn't understand it. He didn't understand how something that felt so undeniably true in his body could be a lie on paper, and that question sat in him like a stone he couldn't put down. He drove to Itaewon that night without calling first, took the stairs 2 at a time, and pounded on her door until she opened it. "You did something," he said, no greeting, no patience left in him. "That test was wrong. I know it was wrong. Tell me what you did." Naomi stood in the doorway, unmoved by the heartbreak written plainly across his face for the first time since she'd known him. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was answer enough, and it was the kind of silence that had kept her sons alive for 6 years. What neither of them knew, in that doorway, in that argument, was that 3 floors below, 2 unfamiliar men had already parked outside her building, quietly running her name against every federal database they could reach. The men outside weren't federal agents. They belonged to Kiwon. By morning, Naomi understood exactly what those 2 men parked below her window had been sent to do. Kiwon, humiliated in front of 400 guests, had spent the last week not grieving her lost wedding, but building a case. A fabricated trail of falsified wire transfers, forged documents, and a whisper campaign designed to paint Naomi Sterling as a foreign spy who had infiltrated Seoul's elite for financial gain. It was elegant, in the way cruelty often is when it's dressed up as a legal process. It was also exactly the kind of trap Naomi had spent her whole career learning to walk into on her own terms. She didn't panic. She packed 3 small backpacks the night before, drove the boys to a woman she trusted completely. An old contact whose name had never once appeared in any file with Naomi's, and kissed each of her sons on the forehead without letting them see her hands shake. The agents came for her at dawn. She opened the door before they could knock twice. By noon, Han Ki-won stood on the other side of a 2-way mirror in a private interrogation suite her family had built specifically for moments like this, watching Naomi Sterling sit in a metal chair with the composure of a woman waiting for a table at brunch. Ki-won walked in expecting tears or fury or begging. She got none of it. "You should have stayed hidden," Ki-won said, circling her slowly. "Instead, you humiliated me at my own wedding, and now you'll disappear quietly, the way people like you always do." Naomi finally looked up, and something in her expression made even Ki-won's practiced calm falter. "People like me. Foreign, powerless, convenient." Naomi almost laughed. "I've been sitting inside your family's shipping records for 6 years. Ki-won. I watched every shell company you built to launder syndicate money through your father's textile business. I've had a federal case file on the Han family since before I ever met Seokjin." She let that settle in the silence of the room, watching the color drain slowly from Ki-won's face. "You didn't ruin my life by having me investigated. You just triggered the exact evidence release I've been sitting on, waiting for the right moment to use." Ki-won's phone began buzzing in her pocket, then again, then it didn't stop. Across the city, in real time. Every account belonging to the Han family, offshore holdings, shell corporations, personal accounts, even Ki-won's own wedding fund, froze simultaneously, flagged under an international financial crimes directive that had apparently existed for years without a single person in her family ever knowing it was watching them. Ki-won stared at Naomi through the glass, and for the first time in her life, the woman who represented every version of power Naomi had once been told to fear looked, simply, afraid. Across town, Seok-jin's car tore through red lights toward the holding facility the moment he heard Naomi had been taken. 50 armed men trailing behind him, ready to burn the building down if that's what it took, with absolutely no idea that the woman he was racing to save didn't need rescuing at all. Viewers, can we get some praise for a woman who plays chess while these villains are playing checkers? Naomi Sterling didn't just survive the slums. She used them as a base of operations to bring down a whole criminal dynasty. If you are screaming at your TV right now for this absolute queen, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment saying Queen Naomi, and turn on notifications. Seok-jin's men hit the facility gates expecting a war, and found silence instead. 50 armed soldiers fanned out through a building that should have been crawling with Han family security, and met nothing but empty hallways and zip-tied guards already lying face down on the floor, disarmed by people who had clearly gotten there first and done the job better than his men ever could have. He walked through it all like a man moving through a dream that refused to make sense, gun drawn, heart pounding, chasing a rescue that no longer needed him. He found Naomi in the interrogation suite, sitting calmly, sipping water someone had brought her, looking up at him with an expression that wasn't relief either. It was something steadier, something that had been waiting 6 years to be spoken out loud. "You're safe," he said, breathless, lowering his weapon. "I know what you thought." She stood, unhurried, and closed the door behind him so they were alone. "It's time you knew everything, Seok-jin, not pieces of it, all of it." That was the moment he understood the negative test had been a lie, though he still didn't understand why, and that unanswered question hung in the room like smoke. If she'd lied about the results, what else had she been protecting him from not knowing? "The DNA test," Naomi said, watching his face carefully, "was never negative. I switched the samples myself. Patris, Evans, and Jeffrey are your sons, Seok-jin. They have always been your sons." He staggered back a step, gun forgotten in his hand, the floor of his understanding cracking wide open for the second time in a week. "Why?" he breathed. "Would you make me believe they weren't?" "Because the moment the syndicates believed those boys were yours, they became targets, leverage, collateral in a war that has nothing to do with them. I forged that result to buy them 6 more days of being ordinary children instead of young heirs." Her voice didn't waver, even as her eyes finally softened for the first time since she'd opened that apartment door. "I have spent 6 years protecting your sons from the only thing more dangerous than not knowing you, being known by everyone else." Seok-jin sank into the chair across from her, the weight of it landing all at once. Not just the truth of his own blood, but the staggering scope of what she had built alone, in the shadows, while he ruled a kingdom that had never once protected the people who mattered most. He looked down at his own hands that had signed contracts worth more than small nations, hands that had also, just days ago, knelt on a schoolyard to fix 3 small ties. For the first time in his adult life, young Seok-jin understood with total clarity that his empire and his sons could not exist in the same world, and that he was the only one standing between them, forced now to choose which one he was willing to let go. He made his choice before he even left that room. Seok-jin called every captain of the Jung Syndicate to the old warehouse district by midnight, the same meeting hall where his father had once passed him the crown at 26 years old with a warning that mercy was a weakness men like them couldn't afford. 12 men stood before him now, all of them expecting orders about the Han family, about retaliation, about the war Ki-won's arrest was surely about to ignite. Instead, Seok-jin stood at the head of the table and set down his own weapon first. "As of tonight, the Jung Syndicate is finished," he said, and the room went as still as a held breath. "Whatever businesses among you want to go legitimate, I will personally help you make that transition. Whoever wants to walk away clean, I will make sure no one follows you. And whoever intends to keep running blood money through this city," his voice hardened into something his captains hadn't heard in years, You will not do it under my name, and you will not do it near my sons." A few men argued. One reminded him what his father would have said. Seokjin only answered, quietly, that his father had never once knelt down to fix a child's tie, and that was exactly the kind of man he refused to become. By the end of the night, the empire his family had built across 3 generations had folded itself into silence, and nobody in that room dared test whether he meant it. The unanswered question that trailed him out of that warehouse wasn't whether the other syndicates would retaliate. It was whether a man could truly walk away from 30 years of power without that power eventually coming looking for him. He found Naomi at dawn, sitting on the steps of her building with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, watching the sun come up over a city that no longer belonged to him. "It's done," he said simply. "All of it. I'm not asking you to trust me because of what I said tonight. I know actions are the only currency that means anything to you now." He sat beside her, closer than he'd allowed himself in 6 years. "I don't want to walk back into their lives as a king, Naomi. I want to earn my way in as their father, however long that takes." Naomi studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the performance she'd learned to expect from powerful men, and found, for the first time, none. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small card, plain white, simple black lettering. The Sterling Haven Community Bookstore and Reading Room. "I'm opening this next month," she said, pressing it into his hand. "If you're serious about earning anything, the delivery truck comes Tuesday morning, and those boxes are heavier than they look." Can you believe the power of the sister? She brought the entire underworld to its knees and forced a mafia boss to face his own blood without firing a single bullet. Seokjin has laid down his crown for his true sons. If you believe a real man protects his family by choosing peace over violence, hit that like button right now and share this video with a friend who loves real drama. Seokjin never got the chance to lift a single box that Tuesday because Madam Jung got to Naomi first. She found her on a bench in the park near the boys' school the following week, sitting alone with a folder of building permits in her lap, waiting for the bell. Madam Jung arrived without warning, in a black car that idled at the curb like a threat, wrapped in furs that cost more than the entire block Naomi had once called home. She sat down uninvited, the way people do when they've never once in their life imagined a closed door. "I'll be direct," Madam Jung said, sliding a leather folder across the bench. $100 million, a trust fund fully vested in the boys' names. In exchange, you take my grandsons and you disappear, far from Seoul, far from my son, far from anything that could ever remind this family of where they came from. Naomi didn't open the folder. She didn't need to. "You raised a son who ran a criminal empire for 20 years, Naomi said quietly. "And your first instinct, meeting your own grandsons for the first time, is to pay for them to vanish. I'm protecting this family's legacy." "No," Naomi finally turned to look at her, and something in her stillness made the older woman's practiced composure falter for the first time. "You're protecting your reputation. There's a difference, and it took me 39 years and a life you people tried to destroy to learn it." She picked up the folder, and for one breath Madam Jung allowed herself to believe she'd won. Then Naomi tore the deed cleanly in half. She dropped both pieces into the trash bin beside the bench without ceremony, the way you'd discard something already worthless, and the unanswered question sitting quietly beneath the moment was whether Madam Jung had ever, in her entire life, watched someone refuse her money and mean it. "Hear me clearly," Naomi said, standing now, her voice low and even. "You will never contact me again. You will never approach my sons without my permission. And if you ever try to use your money as a weapon against this family again, I will personally make sure every federal contact I have spends the rest of your life reminding you what real power looks like. I built a case that froze the Han family's entire fortune in one afternoon. Don't test what I could do to yours." Madam Jung opened her mouth, found nothing there strong enough to answer with, and closed it again. For the first time in decades, the woman who had ruled her family with fear alone had met someone she could not intimidate, could not buy, and could not outlast. She rose slowly from the bench, the fur suddenly looking heavier on her shoulders than it had all morning, and walked back toward her car without another word. Head lowered, spine still straight out of habit, but utterly, unmistakably defeated. Naomi sat back down, picked up her permits, and waited calmly for the school bell to ring. The school bell rang that afternoon 6 months ago, and in the time since, an entire life had quietly rebuilt itself around it. The Sterling Haven sat on a corner that used to be a shuttered pawn shop, its windows now lined with second-hand paperbacks and a hand-painted sign Naomi had chosen herself. On Tuesday mornings, delivery trucks still came, and a man in a plain gray t-shirt still hauled boxes up the front steps, his knuckles scraped, his back sore in a way none of his old tailored suits had ever required of him. Seokjin had kept his word. Every Tuesday, no exceptions, no bodyguards trailing behind him, no reminders left of the empire he'd folded into nothing 6 months earlier. He'd changed in ways that went deeper than the clothes. The buzz cut had grown out soft at the edges. The tattoo climbing his neck was still there, a scar of who he used to be, but now it sat above a collar that belonged to an ordinary man who coached a Saturday soccer league and showed up early to carry chairs for story hour. That afternoon, the courtyard behind the bookstore was full of noise. Patris sprinting after a soccer ball with his father close behind. Evans calling out plays no one was actually following. Jeffrey standing near the goal with his chin propped thoughtfully on his hand, studying the field the way his father once studied a room full of enemies. Naomi watched from the back steps, a stack of exam notes in her lap, 3 months from finishing the law degree she'd started in secret years ago, back when survival meant staying invisible and brilliant at the same time. The unanswered question that had followed her for 6 months finally settled that afternoon, watching Seokjin let Jeffrey win a match he could have easily taken, whether a man could really unlearn 30 years of ruling people and become, simply, a father who let his son win. Watching him now, she believed it. He crossed the courtyard toward her as the boys chased the ball toward the far fence, and knelt down beside the steps, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket with hands that, for the first time she could remember, were shaking. "I'm not asking you to forget 6 years," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve an easy yes. I'm only asking for a chance to spend the rest of my life earning my place in whatever light you're willing to let me stand in." Naomi looked at the box, then at him, not the kingpin who had once frozen at an altar, not the desperate man who had pounded on her door, but the man who had shown up every single Tuesday without being asked twice. "Okay," she said simply, and something in her voice, steady and sure, carried the weight of every door she'd ever had to hold shut alone. "Let's build something real this time, together." Across the courtyard, the boys turned at once, as if they'd felt it before they understood it, and came running, 3 sets of small arms crashing into their parents at the same moment, laughter rising into the evening air over a family finally, fully whole. What an incredible journey of dignity, justice, and the unstoppable strength of a mother's heart. Naomi Sterling proved that the quietest woman in the room can truly be the most powerful. If this ending brought tears of joy to your eyes, make sure you are subscribed, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and we will see you in the next powerful story.